welcome back to my channel. My name is Claire, and in today's video we are going to be doing an Edgar Allan Poe short story and poetry update. If you saw my October TBR video, then you kind of saw me announce this like self-imposed challenge. I'm trying to read a story roughly every day because there's 24 stories and then like a handful of poems. Get through this whole thing throughout the month of October, so this is kind of my check-in on the stories that I've read thus far. Also, I am back in Columbus for a wedding, and me and my friend rented out a wackadoodle Airbnb. It is wild. It's been an interesting experience staying in here, but I thought it would also be fun to talk about the stories I've read while I'm here. The first one is A Telltale Heart. This is A, very short story, B, probably his most famous other than The Raven, and C, one that I've read like 5 times throughout the course of my public education history. I feel like it was always one the English teachers brought out specifically during October because it is such a quick read, but it is very suspenseful and there's just a lot of interesting stuff there. It's very famous for a reason. I liked it a lot, and even though I knew what was coming, it's like, oh yeah, Mr. Poe is just very good at using really intense language or very vivid imagery. Little did I know that there was going to be a whole theme with this stuff, because I haven't read a ton of Poe literature. Telltale Heart has all the key things too, which I'm finding in a lot of Poe stories, which is the idea of someone going crazy or committing a sin, and then out of guilt and terror ends up revealing themselves. That guilt is often culminated in someone being buried or buried alive, and that's just throughout the like 4 stories that I've read thus far the major theme. This Airbnb literally has a hookah lounge. The next story I read, which is one that I have read before but I didn't remember it as well as A Telltale Heart, and that is The Black Cat. And this one I actually found pretty disturbing. I kind of realized through reading this book how much I like reading Poe. I just got done with Jane Austen's Emma, and while Jane Austen is also pretty easy to consume, there's definitely a language barrier where, at least with Telltale Heart and The Black Cat, I was like, wow, this could be more or less written by a modern day author. It's so accessible. I was genuinely shocked and creeped out by the end of The Black Cat. I guess I don't want to give any spoilers in case you haven't read it. It's an easy read and it's kind of similar, more drawn out. It's longer than A Telltale Heart, but where someone's kind of going insane, he's taking it out on the animals and the people in his life and just gets consumed by guilt. Like, it really is just a Telltale Heart, but with just a different type of flavor. Alright, so the next book I read by Poe, or the next story, is one that I think is also decently famous. It's one that I've heard of before, but not one I particularly cared for, and that is The Fall of the House of Usher. And I know I just talked about how consumable Poe's writing was. That did not apply with The Fall of the House of Usher. I actually had to go and watch some people talk about it on YouTube because I was like, what is happening? There's actually a really good foreign animation video. I'll link it down below. It's like an abridged version of the story, but the visuals really help, and it's just the language is so thick, and I think he's like trying to do like a character. I didn't care for it. It's like I couldn't feel how like creepy the situation was or the setting was or anything like that because I was too wrapped up in trying to decipher this like thick language, which I didn't have a problem really with before or after that story, but with The Fall of the House of Usher, it's just like, ugh, I don't know what you're trying to tell me most of the time. And even afterwards, when I looked up more stuff about it and I understood it better, even then I was like, that's just not that creepy to me. That's just not that disturbing. There's like some disturbing aspects. Because I mean, the thing with The Fall of the House of Usher is I guess it's implied that the friend who the main guy, the point of view character, is visiting, that he has an incestuous relationship with his sister. But like, if that's the case, I didn't pick that up in the text. It's so subtle through this incredibly like convoluted language barrier, whatever creep factor is there is difficult to pick up on. That was definitely a story that slowed down my reading experience. It took me a few days to get through just because I was like, ugh, I don't want to read this. This is not a particularly fun or enjoyable read for me. And then the last short story that I read recently is The Pit and the Pendulum, and this is one that I knew nothing about going into it, and I will say there was like a little bit of that language barrier for the first like third of the story. Not even a language barrier, but I was just like, I don't get what the point of the story is. So it starts out with this man, he knows he's going to be executed, he's feeling this despair, he seems to be a prisoner of war, he's full of like sadness and darkness and angst, but it just goes on and on and on about like how sad he is, how depressed he is, how like doesn't want death, but he's waiting for death. But it like literally goes on for like 3 or 4 pages. And I'm just like, I don't get, is this just the story? Just reading about this incredibly depressed individual? But then the actual plot of the story gets going, and then it gets interesting. And by the end of it, I actually really, really liked it because it was so weird. It was almost a borderline, not science fiction-y, but just very unusual. I think especially for this time period, and like just very creative and like ghastly, but it's like, again, he's in like this prison and the walls are changing and there's this like massive pendulum with like a knife or a saw at the end of it that's slowly being brought down and coming towards him, and these rats that are coming out of the pit and they're like swarming all over him. Some of the imagery, especially with the rats, was extremely disturbing. Like I was kind of impressed by how creeped out I was getting, and yeah, just the whole setting and what was going on. I was like, whoa, I just wasn't ready for it to go in this direction, and that I found really cool. I like when it gets creative and genuinely takes me by surprise. I think The Black Cat, despite how disturbing it is my favorite story thus far, but The Pit and the Pendulum is kind of up there. If the first third, like I said, wasn't so repetitive, it would maybe be up there further because it is just so creative and bizarre, and I just can't predict where it's going. Because I also did get the vibe when reading The Black Cat that it is kind of like The Telltale Heart. It's like, oh, I think I kind of see where this is going, where like The Pit and the Pendulum, I reached the end and I was like, what? So lastly, I wanted to talk about a few of the poetry pieces that I've read of his, but I don't feel like I'm particularly sophisticated when it comes to poetry analysis. Like, I think this is stuff that I'm going to have to look up on my own and get some people who are more well-versed in poetry to maybe give me a little bit of a rundown of what he means. Like, I read To Helen, which seemed just kind of like this admirable, romantic, longing piece. Is this about a real person or like a prominent person or mythological figure? I don't know. I couldn't really tell her. I just don't know enough about what he's talking about, like if he's giving those hints that it is a prominent figure or is about somebody that was maybe more in the zeitgeist back in his day, but for me, I'm kind of like shaky on. I really liked the poem Alone, which seems to be about him feeling different, very, very like emo kid gothic, like I was different as a child, I'm not like other kids. But there's some really beautiful imagery. I have it open. For example, from the torrent or the fountain, from the red cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tint of gold, from the lightning in the sky as it passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm, and the cloud that took the form. That's really beautiful. Do I understand like the deeper imagery of it right away? No. That's the thing with poetry that is interesting, and I am glad that I'm taking some time to read it. And again, it's like I just don't quite understand how one goes about poetry, like people who are really into poetry, well versed, well educated on it, and do you just read it multiple times and then like sit with it for a while, or is it like normal and natural to look up other people's interpretations of someone's work? But Alone, I would say, was, at least for the 3 poems that I've read thus far, the most accessible, and I feel like I got like a decent grip about what it was about. And the other one that I read was called Lenore, and that one I also was like, I do not quite understand. It seemed to be about a woman dying and like her transcending to heaven, I think. That one was a little hard to wrap my head around from verse to verse. So anyway, that's just where I'm at with the poetry. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me and in this very spooky, creepy, weird Airbnb. I will have another one of these videos out as I get through more and more Poe stories. So thank you so much for hanging out with me. Let me know if you have read any of the stories that I have talked about in this video, or what your favorite Poe story or poem is in general, because I might be getting to it later. Please make sure to like and subscribe, as that helps out my channel so much. I appreciate you guys, and I will hang out with you next time. Bye.